Welcome to Our Next Existence by Katie and the Chorus. I'm Katie, former technology strategist turned reluctant spiritual medium, and I channel messages from the Chorus, a group of beings just beyond our sensory perceptions who are loving, expansive, and who greatly enjoy sharing their perspective of us. Join us each week as we share and discuss their ideas about humanity's existence, purpose, and future. Concepts you can draw from to accelerate your path, expand your perceptions, and ultimately step into the flow of the universe and your life. Welcome back, everybody. If you're still sort of reeling from last week's episode and not really sure which one of your relationships is a soulmate and which is something else, and if this is all for survival or there's something beyond the pinhole and maybe there's a context you know that you're missing and is somehow coming in, but you're not sure what, I understand. More than ever in this season, we are going to be stretching beyond the capacity of mental processing. As part of awakening, the further we go, the more we will step into more of our energetic tools. Now, from some perspectives, that's going to feel like the brain is doing less. And from those perspectives, that is completely true, because if you look at a total ratio of job doing in the course of our conscious existence, whereas at one point the mind did and was basically everything, now we are expanding into these other things, these other tools, these other energies, these other capacities that will assist us in moving about reality and the universe. We may come to a point where we are living entire days in a sense of intuition or inspiration or other words that we haven't yet invented. And we may not actually think much about what we're doing. From another perspective, equally valid in a universe of infinite perspectives, the mind could also be considered as transforming. And that as we stretch out beyond it and become more aware of what its capacity had been and sort of ooze into these energetic parts of us, the brain will ultimately catch up. It will begin to function in a different way. It may more rapidly cognate what we are experiencing on energetic levels. It may also invent new words or string together old ones to perfectly explain concepts that otherwise previously it would have taken us many, many minutes or many, many, many more words to convey the thing. Rapid understanding is one way of saying it. In spiritual circles, this is already well known today as a feeling of, I just knew it. I just know it. She said something that somehow inside of me, I just knew. Sometimes that sense is purely energetic. It's an energetic connection that has been formed between you and the material. Sometimes what it is also representing is actually a harmony, a new kind of harmony between energetic perception and mental cognition. In that harmony, all aspects of yourself feel unified or united. It resonates fully. And if you were asked to explain it, it may take you a minute to get going because time and energy are still in a relationship in our reality. But you feel as though you could explain it potentially in your own words, even though you haven't ever done it before. This is the mind reaching beyond its previous limitations, where it really only liked to describe things that it felt like somewhere along the line in your linear history it had studied and validated and known. It would append new understandings to old understandings as a way of reassuring itself. We would feel in our beings, but from the Chorus's perspective, it was a way of relimiting new information into a slightly different version of what had come before. Now, as we step into sort of this knowing sense broadly, it will develop more nuance. And one of the nuances that we'll become aware of is a willingness or a readiness to explain things that some part of us energetically knows inside of us. And so our mind agrees and supports it and will step out and explain new things with physical words and concepts that it hasn't really have lived experience of in conscious memory yet. I've described this process in some of the other episodes. And what I've discovered happens is as that alignment occurs, often what happens afterwards are that memories or connections from the universe show up to validate that new energetic resonance that you've reached. To many societies, this is the natural order of things, you could say. You reach an energetic frequency, you resonate there, and then all the manifestations come through your system to match or to reflect that. It was in our experience of limitation that we felt like we needed to sort of add up or study physical manifestation that was in our environment in order to then produce that new understanding. Instead, what we're coming to now in awakening is a reverberation, an energetic sense of an understanding, and then the explanations come after that. Both are valid ways of experiencing creation and the universe. Both could have aspects of limitation on an infinite scale. Both could be expansive on an infinite scale. So it's not really about one being right or wrong or one higher up in the hierarchy than another one. It's just clarifying differences in sensation and experience as we go through awakening. And particularly as a human, how do we walk through that? So the first thing I would say is as you go into this season, know that you will probably feel more things, resonate with more things before it makes mental sense to you. It'll feel like, yeah, I know this. And then if you very quickly try and translate that into a thought, you may be brought up short. You may come back again and again to the sensation of, wait, it doesn't make sense. Wait, but I felt it, but it doesn't make sense. But I felt it, but it doesn't make sense. Over time, as you come back to a way of explaining it or a way of understanding it mentally about your life, the way to think about your relationships, the way to think about that previous romantic history that you had, it will translate eventually. But sometimes we go through a phase where we bring to consciousness the new aspects of energetic perception that we're expanding into versus what had been our outermost limits of the mind. There are many things in awakening that will not make mental sense for a minute. And yet somehow they totally click. So I'll tell you what I do. As a human, I try to balance leaning into these energetic tools, but also continuing to experience the benefits and the value of a mind. There are things here in the five senses world that will continue to be a perfect fit for mental thinking. So if I move into a super expansive energetic experience and then I come back to day-to-day life, at first there is a resistance of like, why am I back here? That thing was so fast and it was so incredible and I felt so many more things and now I feel like a dull wire. There's nothing happening. Why am I back here in this dense place, as we often feel? So then I find things that are appropriately dense to do. And sometimes there is a great deal of satisfaction in doing something that is dense and accomplishing something, because the five senses mind loves to accomplish things, loves to tick boxes, loves to check stuff off and know that we are well on track for our survival. So I downloaded a new budget app and I budget things and I like dragging and dropping them into their different categories. There's nothing inspired about it. I mean, I felt inspired to download it, perhaps, sure, but it is literally just thinking about where to put my expenditures into which category. And my mind is thrilled. Survival is assured. I have cleaned out the garage. I have organized folders. I have gone back through old files and purged them. I have made lists of new goals for my business. I go on long walks. I bought a pair of rollerblades. I push myself on wheels around and around and around my neighborhood. You know what? Feels good. As we touched on in the first episode, we will continue to bring through these energetically expanding experiences all the way through our bodies. down through our bones, out through our feet, out through every expression we make in this reality. Now, at first, the contrast between those energetic things and the physical ways that we express them is going to feel kind of big. When I go on a super amazing 5-dimensional trip, literally to different places in the world, which we'll talk about this season, and then I come back to day-to-day life, there is a tangible difference in the energy for me. I feel it. And as a human, it would be easy to get caught up in the idea that that is over there. That energy, those experiences are away from my day-to-day life in my house. And my day-to-day life in my house is dense and it's here and it has to be dealt with. And it's sort of like this anchor that if I didn't have it, I would be free to explore the universe, finally out of this BSC crap. And from a certain perspective, sure, that could be true. But the reason the chorus introduced the season the way they did in the first episode is because they were pointing out that, well, your expansion will be manifested, will be given birth by you into this reality. So maybe it starts as these trips that you take, or this amazing spiritual conference that you went to, or this incredible weekend that you had away at a yoga retreat. Maybe it starts there. But what we are all doing is integrating these aspects of ourselves into this reality. It is transcendence by some views. We are transforming the reality that we all exist in and have created by way of transforming ourselves, meaning we reach vaster energies from this perspective. We bring down those energies through ourselves, through our physical instruments, and give birth to those things here. Which means over the course of this last year, I have had more and more 5D experiences popping up in my house, popping up in my dreams, popping up in my waking moments, coming into play in my evening moments. They're the easiest ones to forget because there are still aspects of disconnection and forgetting that are active in our reality for a little while. But they are also continuing to show up everywhere that I show up. At one point, I needed these things to be separate in my awakening because I needed that normal aspect of life to balance out what felt like an immense amount of energy that was coming through. I needed what we would call normalcy. As you give yourself time to integrate these sort of out there experiences into daily life, and as we all do this as a group consensus, what will happen is that what is considered normal will evolve for all of us, individually, in our communities, and across the board. The more we all go through this, the more we will be given permission by the group consensus, or just sort of given a freedom by way of our choice of personal belief to express these extraordinary aspects of each of us, even in the day-to-day, quote, normal parts of this reality. This is the chaos in some ways that the chorus has alluded to, seasons 1 and season 2. It's brought about by our awakening in many ways. We're going to see stuff and realize stuff about our environment and about our world and about the universe that we never did before, but also each of us that are expanding are going to be bringing through an expression of that expansion into this reality that will then be visible, experienceable by others who are around us. And each time we're near someone who has sort of one of those expansive giving births to in our vicinity, it will activate within each of us new realizations about what we each are uniquely capable of, which sometimes is going to feel like we're about to take flight, and other times is going to feel like total and complete overwhelm. So you can feel the extraordinariness of some amazing energetic perception that you just had. You can be terrified by some energetic perception that you just had. You can tune it all out and sit on the couch and just drag and drop expenditures into your categories on your app. You can take a nap. You can do whichever part of you most needs whichever thing to do in whichever moment you feel the need to do it. It's a dance. It's dynamic. It's flowing. There are no rules. We are inventing the rules. But maybe as you go through this, just keep in mind that it is quite an experience to go from thinking about the powerful and incredible being that you must be to actually, truly becoming that being right now, in this day and age, in this reality, holding a cell phone, living in a house, driving to your job, and doing all the things that were once so predictable and are becoming anything but. And so now, from one group of incredible beings to us, another group of incredible beings, I give you the chorus. In the first part of the episode, you'll hear directly from the chorus themselves, and then afterwards we will discuss. Talk to you soon. Great warriors of your time, what would you consider to be the definition of a warrior? From your perspective in a five senses world, it may quite literally be ones who war. But given that you understand our perspective on your perspective, on when a war is necessary and how much it is based upon experiences of finiteness and insufficiency, one may begin to wonder if there are any other definitions of this term, or if we, where we are, have an experience of any kind of warrior at all. What else could it mean then? What type of role or being would choose to take up arms against another? And is that required? There is in your world a concept of a warrior of light, one who hails of a different frequency, who has come to these energies in order to bring about a shift in the resonance, the frequency, or the light of this world. We understand and embrace this perspective, for there are many who have arrived here at your doorstep and among you in an effort to change what they believe is unfolding. There are many perspectives, there are many agendas, there are many groups, much of which you will come to know each and personally. But here also is perhaps an idea of a deficiency that has brought about or resulted in the concept of a warrior. Beloved ones, this universe is vast. And beyond this corner that you find yourselves in and awakening into, there are yet many other wavelengths and many other places in creation where beings interact, where they come together, where they find out new and different things about themselves by way of colliding with others. In these places, there is not so much fear as is often felt in your domain. For there is an understanding, a reliance upon, and a strength that is felt within each one of these beings. They do not war potentially to do away with something. Rather, they come into combat positions, as you would call it, in order to create, to discover the next thing to know about them each and each other. From many views, this would be looked at as a meeting of equals. And it would also be looked at as the edge of creation, where this meeting, perhaps even some might say divinely orchestrated, will be an expression of creation herself, where none can predict the outcome, nor what will be learned. Each and every participant shows up with an open willingness, an open heart, and an embrace of total unknown possibility. The movements of these players go beyond calculation and vying for a certain outcome to a vital aliveness that comes to the forefront of all that has been known and all that is unknown, steps into the fray and creates with the pure energy that flows through them each. In some ways, by contemplating this perspective, it could be said that each and every aspect of creation is and can be a warrior. Beloved ones, there are many forces in this universe. Some that by your views you might consider positive, some that by your views you might consider negative. You know by now that we would more likely reflect to you the words of not preferred for negative and preferred for positive. As you come to an understanding of the many groups, the many factions that have been and are around you, there will be some perspectives that you very naturally prefer. And coming to the understanding that there have been and are perspectives around you that you do not prefer, you may feel that you must rapidly gain your footing in order to deal with these other types and kinds and ways and means. And this may be true. For in your world, a warrior must be prepared. A warrior must always understand and anticipate, and we understand this perspective. However, dear one, there are many perspectives in this universe, and warriors are not prepared and trained by these views. A warrior is born in an instant. The moment that individual opens their heart to total and complete possibility that lives, that exists inside of them and has always been there. You can change your armor in a moment. You can grow into a colossal power in an instant. All possibility lives and breathes in you. It is unlikely, coming from the perspective that you have been, that you will know in advance how any of this will unfold. And by our view, that is well, for that means you have stepped beyond many of the aspects of limitation of this particular corner of the belief system complex. And in these steps of awakening, That means you have more freedom than ever to experience new and surprising aspects of yourself, to stand equals with such a wide variety of other beings as you have never dreamed of, and to find out together what will take place when you each bravely, trustingly, lovingly step into the great unknown. Much like we, to you, were once unknown. We love you infinitely. Into the unknown. I will spare you singing that song from the Frozen 2 soundtrack. I feel like I've made enough analogies to punching things these last 2 episodes, but also to the concepts of the underdog and all sorts of other things, I guess, in seasons 1 and 2, that perhaps it's time we finally started talking about what all the fuss is about. I've alluded to talking to ETs and showing up in what felt to me like a battlefield, a very windy battlefield. We've alluded to powerlessness and potentially new world orders. And when I started recording these things a couple years ago, none of this was really talked about that mainstream, or at least not the corners of this game that I was in. I was in a pretty mainstream, just day-to-day life kind of mentality, and this stuff hadn't cracked into that yet. But I understand that wherever you are in time, as you listen to this understanding will inevitably be growing because we are. As I suggested in the afterword of season 2, the chorus has pointed out over and over again that as you expand into more of the universe and creation, you see more of the universe and creation. This would be something that would be easy for us all to overlook. Sort of like, oh yeah, sure, whatever, until there's like literally a being standing in your lawn. And who knows how long that being had been there. Did he just show up or did you? We're going to continue to have these types of moments as we awaken as a collective, and some moments that we'll all hear about from each other, but also individual moments too, where it's sort of like, who moved into the field of view? Did they arrive or did we expand? And depending on which perspective you're looking from, both, yes, always. But in each of these situations, there will actually be answers. Maybe not in the exact instant itself that you are seeing a new being, but they will come to your understanding because you're expanding. And though at times it has felt like an expansion, a contraction, an expansion and contraction, or as we talked about in season 2, moving so rapidly around the game board, that's just like, there's another thing, there's another thing, there's another thing. They are all there, and we are all there, and we are expanding in our ability to perceive these things, remember them, connect the dots between them, and form our own perspectives on them. And as we've talked about, we don't just do that by thinking about it. We do that by going out in the world, by going out in the universe and discovering it. Today, the chorus brought up the concept of a warrior. And they started out by saying, okay, let's start with the human perspective on a warrior and what that is. And typically, a warrior, the concept of, is someone or some group that is called into being, is shaped up, is spruced up, is trained, is given armor and all sorts of things, because there is an identified need for that warrior to exist. There is perhaps, given our fantastic game of survival, something that has been identified as being a threat to our survival or a potential threat to our survival. As we activate the beliefs of prevention and protection, depending on how far away we view that threat to be, one of the common concepts that we fall back on again and again and again is a way of sort of building up or reinforcing our defenses or our ability to be an aggressor against that other threat. And that requires a type of manifestation that is practically tailor-built to overcome or overthrow the identified threat. The concept of a warrior is so well integrated into the human perspective and into our remembered history that we barely even question it. If you were to expand outside of a human perspective, however, and come back and look across the remembered aspects of our linear timeline, one of the questions you might say is, why do you guys need this warrior thing over and over and over again? You talk about these different eras of your history and how much has changed and how differently you function. But I don't know, if I look back across your history, I see soldiers there. There's really nowhere on the game board in this version of history that you all have been that you didn't have an army with you. What's that about? It would be easy for us as humans to dismiss this outsider perspective and be like, well, you don't know what we've been up against. It's a game of survival. There's insufficiency everywhere you go here. There's never enough water, food, shelter, time, power. There's always somebody who's coming to get your stuff. So you have to have this built-in aspect of your society in order to be ready to deal with that. Seems pretty cut and dried, doesn't it? And the Chorus is saying, totally. We get it. We've seen you on these parts of your history, and we see you in this juncture and awakening where you are still connected to those parts of your history. And it seems to be a consistent theme. A theme that is made in reaction to these fundamental aspects of how everything works here. And that would be true. But you're awakening. So what else could a warrior be in sort of these next levels, these next boxing rings that you're moving into, if we want to continue with a fighting type of analogy? And they suggested that perhaps a warrior is not someone or something that has been created in preparation for or prevention against a perceived or known threat, that rather a warrior is more of a present moment creation that steps into the unknown. And when they show up to meet these other adversaries or beings in order to better understand themselves, but also to better understand the other parties. A perspective like this is not founded upon insufficiency or a deficiency, as the Chorus says, that needs to be dealt with. Rather, it's someone who's brave enough to step into an unknown opportunity with no estimation, no mental projection about what that situation will produce. The whole point is that it is unknown. The greater levels of trust that this kind of stepping into requires is what other societies might consider to be a warrior. It is someone who can embrace deeply, wholly, a total unknown. It's like the trust falls of all trust falls. It requires a strength of heart and of spirit that is at times reflected in what we idealize as a brave warrior here. But by the Chorus's view, the human kind of warrior is basing that kind of courage upon the preparation that they have already undergone. So our warriors tend to go through many years of training and practice and dogfights, things like that that build up a system of beliefs within them that they can win a perceived battle. The kind of warrior that the chorus is describing that these other societies or civilizations believe in or hold as a concept has nothing to do with preparation. In fact, there is no way for them to know what aspects of themselves will be birthed in the unknown moment of confrontation. So there is quite technically and literally, no way to prepare for this kind of confrontation. It is birthed in the moment of confrontation itself. Which means the only criteria to be checked before someone could go into this has nothing to do with size of strength or calculation about what might be needed against the adversary. There's really nothing, because nobody knows how it's going to turn out. So the only thing that's required is that a warrior who steps forward has this ability to embrace total and complete possibility. Another way to say it might be, they have a strength within them that allows them to completely surrender to the present moment and everything that will come in through that moment. Now, this would kind of be baffling for a human perspective, because surrender is like the thing that happens once you've tried all other options and you've got nothing left. And you're basically admitting defeat. Surrender is just a euphemism here for like game over, and most of the time you lose. Sometimes in spiritual circles, we use surrender as a way of saying, I opened up to whatever it was that was happening. And this is a little bit closer to what the chorus is suggesting. In the history that's presented at the back of book 2, after one of the more recent destructions, the chorus said that there was a faction of us that surrendered. Specifically, it was after the 4th cataclysm, which the chorus refers to as the War of the Soul. This is on page 223 in book 2. They headlined the page Surrender with, in that moment of sacrifice, were you giving up on yourselves or allowing something to be true? Now, there are and can be many views on surrender, and in fact, we made a podcast episode about it. One of the things that we discussed in that episode was that some views on surrender have to do with time. In a surrendering experience for a human, though there are many things that we may be surrendering or giving up on, whether it was our idea of winning or whether it was idea of just simply how something would go and it's not, woven into this experience for us has been an aspect of time. When we surrender to something in that spiritual sense, where it's like, okay, I give up, this hasn't gone how I thought it would go, there is an admission in some ways that this isn't fully baked yet. I don't understand how it's turning out the way that it is. I have exceeded all of my mental projections for what I thought this would be, and I am blank. I am open. I am unsure. I am stepping into the unknown. In that podcast episode, we also refer to the connection between the sensation and change. Typically, through the process of coming around to a surrender, what we are ultimately releasing step by step by step by step are all the ways we wished it had gone or wanted it to go that typically were related to our experiences of mental projection. When we come around to the surrender, what we are also embracing there is an energy of change. It's not going to be like we thought it was. And we open up to whatever this next thing is. So isn't it interesting that at the conclusion of a war of a soul, which most of us have forgotten and do not consciously connect to and are only just starting to consciously recall, there was a moment of what we would say surrender, but what the chorus might say change. Change, we could say, from the ways we've talked about it in book 1 and book 2, could be looked at as a type of allowance. We typically talk about allowance in terms of curiosity or these positive feeling sensations, and that's true. But our experience of change could also be looked at as a very radical version of this kind of allowance that is also deeply unknown. It is the trust fall of allowance, where humanity right now feels more of the fall than the trust. And trust is something that the Chorus brought up in terms of this surrender. We had to trust something other than anything we had ever experienced and connected to, because we'd run out of options, and we gave ourselves over to a new possibility, to the depths of the unknown, to something that would change. Now, the next page in the book is the fifth earth, according to the Chorus, which is here, which is now. Now, how many of us remember what was, according to the Chorus, the previous step? Some war of the soul? But as usual, they are not bringing up any of this by accident, and certainly not in the order in which they have brought it up, and particularly when today they wanted to talk to us about our concept of a warrior and how we look at overcoming things and how we look at embracing the unknown. So it's probably time that I told you a story. And as usual with these stories, you are not required to believe anything that I am about to say. Benefit of these podcasts is and always has been an energetic experience. There's certain energies that come through the Chorus, through these stories, through other beings that are going to show up. And it's just a chance to experience them, to see what comes up for you in the experience of them. It's not like you have to believe all and everything I say here in order to get it. It's not like a whole chunk of a thing you have to embrace. It's an experience of a thing. And the whole point of the experience is to see what comes up for you. It's kind of the whole point of this life experience we have, this existence that we have. We all head out into the universe in order to see what comes up for us. So where last we left off at the end of season 2, a lot had happened and there were some black helicopters. And through a series of events, I had become good friends virtually with another YouTuber gal who was interested in ancient history and some of these esoteric topics. Now, I will leave it up to the people in these stories to identify themselves in a way that they see fit down the road. For now, I'm going to leave all of this anonymous. So there was a trip that we had planned to the American Southwest to visit different ancient sites in that area. Now, I'll leave it for another time to talk about why that particular area and how I was guided to go to that area and how it all came together the way it often does, but it did. So before we knew it, there we were driving around an SUV in New Mexico. Now, even before I went on this trip, I knew that something was going to happen. I could just feel it. And I wasn't entirely sure that it was a good something. In fact, I was pretty sure it might not be, given how things had been going. It seemed like it was going to be an acceleration, an expansion, as we often say. But also, sometimes as we come up to the brink of these next expansions, everything feels very shaky. All the things that had felt known and secure and dependable are definitely starting to feel a little bit fluid. And all of this was coming up before I got on the plane. In fact, at one point, I think I even said to myself, am I ready for this? Because I somehow knew whatever was going to happen on this trip was going to change me, my life, the way I looked at life. And I thought, okay, well, it's just going to be like a very eye-opening trip to the Southwest. I'm going to get some time away to reflect on things. You know, there was a lot going on in my personal life, as you guys know from last week's episode. So I thought, okay, well, they're probably just going to come to some aha moments through this trip. But it also felt like it was going to be a lot more than that. One of our first stops was to Chaco Canyon. Now, for those who don't know, Chaco Canyon is a very ancient site in the United States Southwest. It's a bit of a mystery. There are large pueblos, large towns in this massive canyon that seem to have at one point held thousands and thousands of people. It seems that there was some advanced pottery and other skills in this valley, and yet it seemed at quite a distance from other known civilizations of that era that had that advanced skill set. And moreover, it seems to have disappeared quite suddenly. The people of Chaco Canyon definitely abandoned it and abandoned it quickly, but it seems to be unclear where they went or why they went, how they showed up there to begin with, or why they left. There are many theories about Chaco, and I think it has drawn a lot of attention over the years because there are so many mysteries to it. But I think for spiritual people or for energetic people or awakening people, there's also a draw to Chaco because there seems to be something connective about this canyon and this place. Something either in the lore about caves and reptilians and ant people and Navajo legends about this place that seems somehow accurate and yet not totally conclusive. There's enough there that many people feel drawn to it. Now, I was going to the Southwest actually with the intent of seeing a very different location. But one of my travel companions raved about Chaco and insisted that we go. And she's usually right when she identifies a neat site to go see. So I was definitely willing when we started to make the drive out there. We were going in February, which is, most people would think, a terrible time to visit Chaco, but actually it was great. Though it was cold, the ground was dry, and there were no snakes. And as happens in the off seasons in most of these places, there were next to no other visitors in the entire canyon besides us. The first day that we went to Chaco, I remember being just overwhelmed by the grandeur and the beauty of the desert. These tall cliffs and mesas that went up out of the desert floor and just the extreme remoteness of it all. It's arid and is mostly scrub brush, not a lot of trees. The ground is a mix of sandiness and clay, riverbeds that are known to also suddenly flood in certain seasons. It has a beauty that is stark and also otherworldly. As soon as we started to come into the canyon, it just felt to me that so much more had happened there than we really understood. As we wandered through the canyon on the first day of the 2 days we planned to go back and visit Chaco, we followed the different hiking trails, went up close to the cliffs, and looked at the different petroglyphs, which are drawings that are made on the sides of these rocks and cliffs. And as we wandered through the canyon, I continued to check in with the chorus the way I kind of always do, but I felt/heard something that I had not before. It was a voice or voices. It seemed like a plurality, kind of, but talking very succinctly and very clearly. And I felt like I heard repeating words. Everywhere we went, I was a little distracted by all the things that I was feeling and hearing. My friends were exploring the rocks and looking at the different structures, and everywhere we went, they found some new pottery shard or something. It seemed like it was a treasure trove all around me, and yet I couldn't really connect with much of it. I was so distracted. I didn't find anything on the ground or any rocks of interest, but I was always glad to see what they had discovered because it brought me back down into my body at a place where there was a lot happening for me energetically. Thankfully, I was with friends who were very open to my skills, very open to the things that I can hear. And they were curious about it when I mentioned that I was hearing something. I tried to formulate some of the words that I was hearing, but it felt practically brutal to say it with my human voice. The sounds or the voices that I were hearing were light, very fine. I don't know, sometimes what we construe in the movies to be like an elven voice. It was just sophisticated, light. I'm not really sure what the word is, but every time I tried to translate what they were saying into my voice, I found that my voice very naturally softened and I practically whispered what they were saying. My human voice felt gravelly and dense by comparison. So for a while, I didn't really want to say any of it because I was still trying to acclimate to what it was that I was hearing before I tried to translate it into our frequencies. So needless to say, the first day in Chaco Canyon left me a little bit bewildered. I was hearing the voices. They were definitely indicating certain things as we walked through the canyon. I was a little bit not in my body, sort of floating around in this perspective, while also trying to keep up with friends who were physically in their bodies, thankfully, and trying to balance with all the things that were in between. By the time we came back on the second day, however, I had a little bit more resolve in my body to experience what these voices were. I wanted to understand it a little better. I was open to more possibilities. It seemed like I could be safe. It seemed like it could be interesting, and it seemed like it could be really enlightening to understand what they had to say. As we drove into the park, we passed a giant cluster of cliffs and fallen boulders. And as we moved past that one area of the canyon, I heard an uptick in what they were saying. As we drove past that area, the voices quieted down again. Later, this would seem very obvious to me, but as this was my first experience with these voices, I didn't quite know how to interpret that. I didn't understand if it was geolocated because, frankly, the chorus never is. The chorus sometimes comes through strong, warmth, loving, envelops me all over. Sometimes they're just very gentle, and it typically has more to do with what's going on with my life than a physical place that I am near. These voices, however, I have come to learn are different than the chorus. They behave in a different manner. They come from different frequencies. And so what may sound obvious hearing this tale, that I drove by a particular area and they kicked up in their voicing and then faded away as I faded away from the spot, was a very new experience for me. We parked nearby at one of the pueblos where they wanted to get pictures and take some video. And I said, I'm just going to wander up the trail, back across the canyon, kind of in the direction of this other place. Now, one of my friends pretty much caught on to the fact that I was feeling something, and I said, yeah, I am, and it's that way. I knew we wouldn't have had time for all of us to stick together and to get all the things done that we needed to, and so I offered that I could just walk across the canyon by myself and catch up to them, to which two of my friends offered to come with me, and we would catch up with the fourth later on. As we started to walk through the scrub brush, what we noticed along the canyon rim was what felt to us like elements of destruction. So there were definitely sides of the canyon that had caved in, but there were also large rocks, large boulders, huge, that seemed to have been sliced and sort of cut off the canyon walls. This would be easy to dismiss from a geologic perspective because by classic geology, this canyon is very old and has experienced a lot of erosion, and sometimes rocks do break in clean lines. But energetically, for me and my friends, again, this feeling came over us that much more had gone on here than was currently understood. As we sort of wandered back through the canyon, back towards the spot where I had heard the voices, the feeling inside of me to go faster to that location grew and grew and grew until finally I found myself practically jogging back in that direction. As I rounded the corner and saw this giant cluster of fallen boulders, I was hit with an overwhelming wave of emotion. I remember that I was starting to repeat one of their words out loud over and over and over again, but I can't totally remember what the word was. But also I was feeling fear and so much sadness. I was trembling as I ran up to these boulders and started climbing my way inside of them. My two friends were behind me, catching up. And as I stood in the middle of this circle of boulders, right at the bottom of this cliff, and looked up at it, I practically wanted to just throw my hands up and just collapse into total sadness, total grief, total loss, as if I was seeing something after a destruction, as if I was finally getting back to the battlefield, as if I was finally starting to see what had gone on. You can imagine that I was completely overwhelmed by what was happening to me. In fact, I don't even think I really had an awareness of what I was doing as I was doing it. Much of this information that I'm sharing with you, I've pieced together based on my friends who told me after the fact what I had done. As I felt this overwhelming sensation of total loss and grief, I turned around and collapsed to the ground, kneeled on the ground right near one boulder. I reached my hand under the boulder without hesitation, pulled on the corner of a tiny piece of rock that was sticking up out of the dirt, and pulled up out of the dirt almost an entirely intact bowl. Now, for those who know Chaco Canyon and the expansive desert that this encompasses, there are bits and pieces of pottery shards everywhere. But to find a nearly intact piece of pottery is extremely unusual, particularly for the gal who the day before, didn't find anything. I barely knew what I was doing in my body. I was looking at the rocks and wandering around, and somehow here had been led back to this exact site, fell on my knees next to this particular boulder, reached under it, and pulled out a bowl. As soon as I held the bowl in my hands, in my lap, as I knelt in the dirt, I lost it. I started sobbing big, heaving sobs as if I had held it in forever. I was so sad. I was so sad about what had happened there. I was so sad about who had died there. I was so sad over the destruction of everything that had broken and was in these giant pieces of debris, these huge car-sized rocks that I was surrounded by. I just cried. My friends, having had spiritual experiences of their own, were gratefully supportive and in some ways not really surprised, even though I was floored. After years of channeling the chorus, nothing like this had ever happened. Nothing had felt so real and so tangible and so in my reality, and the chorus had certainly never brought me to ancient bowls. They asked me what the voices were saying, and I was so overwhelmed by everything I was feeling from them that I really couldn't quite place it. I'm not even sure that I knew what to say other than there was a destruction here. We found in that area many amazing petroglyphs. In fact, some that we hadn't even seen before. The entire boulder area was practically covered with them in a way that we didn't see anywhere else in the valley, even after this experience when we looked. This place was notable to someone or someones, perhaps the beings that were communicating to me. Perhaps they were just spirits from the other side. Perhaps there was something more. I continued walking around this circle with the beings, touching the different stones and crying, tracing my fingers over the petroglyphs, not really understanding what I was feeling, but letting it be felt. Maybe that was the one thing through this whole experience that felt intuitive, was when it comes up, you let it be felt. This place, or me, or them, or maybe all of us, needed to feel and recognize and remember these things. That much I knew. When we finally left to walk back across the canyon to meet up with our other friend, I felt like a tsunami had just blasted its way through my whole being. I felt drained and empty and exhausted, but somehow at peace. At peace about something I didn't even understand. I left a lot of mysteries in that canyon that day. Some of them I took with me. Some of them were meant for me to remember and solve. But it's a vast universe. And as we go through these experiences, we can't carry everything. Sometimes seeing it in the moments when we're there and with it is enough, is what needed to happen. And if more needs to be resolved about some of these things, they'll come back again. But one of the questions that I did leave with, and which continued to follow me around through a whole lot of other experiences over this last year, was what exactly was that destruction? I had spent a lot of free time looking at pictures of different sites around the world, staring at them practically without really knowing why. And once I had that experience in Chaco Canyon, I recognized that I was looking at all these sites for something. I was looking at them in a particular way. And now, having had this experience in Chaco Canyon, I recognized a similarity between all of these sites. If you looked at them as all suffering the same kind of destruction, there were commonalities between them. Maybe the design of the sites were different, maybe the purported ages of the sites were different, but the way in which something destructive affected all of these sites was consistent. I needed to know what that was. And without even really setting a plan for it or a mental projection of how I would do it, it sort of settled into a conscious recognition. This was something that I was following. Does a warrior fly through the skies and punch things? Maybe. Does a warrior stand at the brink of the unknown and face it? Absolutely. You may be called to places and not know why. You may feel things overwhelm you and not know why. You may hear voices and not know why. And in each of those moments, you have a choice. You can turn around and go back to a place that is known where you will prepare. Prepare for that encounter, prepare for those emotions, prepare for that understanding. That is and will forever be a valid five senses experience. Or you can trust that you were brought to that juncture in time and that unknown experience because everything inside of you is already ready for that next expansion. You see, the inherent aspect of every battle, no matter how many perspectives there are and will be about what that is unknown. And the more you find yourself in unknown places in your life, in day-to-day situations, and in the spiritual woo experiences too, the more you are stepping into the warrior that you are and have always been. It is beyond the veil of the thinking that much of these adventures await. And your clarity on what was always inside of you and what will continue to be born await. And all of these unknown experiences where truly anything is possible. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found these messages to be helpful. May they accelerate you on your path wherever you'd like it to go. For more information on the books which correspond to these podcast seasons, our podcast, live events, or how to get in touch with us, visit katieandthechorus.com. Thanks again. See you next time.